Hello, I'm Natalie Zett, and welcome to Flower in the River. This podcast, inspired by my book of the same name, explores the 1915 Eastland disaster in Chicago and its enduring impact, particularly on my family's history. We'll explore the intertwining narratives of others impacted by this tragedy as well, and we'll dive into writing and genealogy and uncover the surprising supernatural elements that surface in family history research. Come along with me on this journey of discovery. Hey, this is Natalie, and welcome to episode 106 of Flower in the River. Today, we are diving into another under-recognized but critical document from the Eastland disaster. It actually doesn't have an official title, but it is the Coroner's Inquest, and it was led by Cook County Coroner Peter Hoffman. If you're not familiar with Peter Hoffman, he was the coroner on duty when the Eastland capsized in downtown Chicago, and there was no disaster playbook, no roadmap for dealing with a tragedy of that scale in downtown Chicago, but Hoffman stepped in, and he acted fast. He secured the 2nd Regiment Armory as a central morgue and immediately convened a coroner's jury to determine accountability. In short, Hoffman took charge when everything around him was in chaos and collapsing. Here's the curious thing, and I still can't figure this one out. This 156-page inquest document, one of the earliest official responses to the disaster, is largely missing from Eastland-focused websites and many publications, not all, though. You'll see occasional references to the document in George Hilton's book on the Eastland, but there it's mostly paraphrased. Until this week, I had never seen the full document anywhere. And how did I find this document to begin with? I'm going to backtrack. A couple weeks ago, I was going through the Polish Roman Catholic Union of America insurance claim files, and these files were for Eastland victims, and I located them on FamilySearch.org. And within each file for each victim who was insured through this organization, I stumbled on this document. It was a 2-page document signed by Peter Hoffman, and in that document, it named who was responsible for the Eastland disaster, and it outlined the legal findings, and this was the breadcrumb that I needed. It was obvious to me that this was a summary document of a larger document. So I went hunting, and I discovered the full inquest document had been hiding in plain sight all along. And this inquest document is the source document for this 2-page document that I found in the insurance records for these people. I know it gets confusing, but hang in there with this. And where did I find this? In the University of Minnesota's digital archives, right in my own backyard practically. And I've uploaded that document to the Internet Archive and will link it to my website as well, so it's available for everyone to look at. What's even more interesting, many of the names listed in this inquest, actual witnesses, survivors, people involved in the investigation, they don't always appear in Eastland books or websites, at least in any detail. For example, you'll be hearing the testimony of a person called R.J. Moore. He's nowhere to be found other than in this inquest document. And there are others who are listed in this document, but that's the last place we find out about them. Some of them might be mentioned in some Eastland disaster-related list, but there's no detail about them. There's no sources from where the information comes from about them. So that continues to be a frustration. Because after all, these were sworn testimonies and they were recorded in detail, very significant to the history. But we are going to get back to this fascinating inquest document because it is filled with real-time survivor testimonies. This is unfiltered, it's messy, it's emotional, and it's vital for the history of the Eastland disaster. And as for Pete Hoffman, he shows up quite a bit in this podcast. I have to admit, I'm a great admirer. He had a controversial later career, but in the aftermath of the Eastland disaster, he showed up with compassion, competence, and urgency. And as a family member who lost somebody on the Eastland, I will forever be grateful to Hoffman for stepping in. He made sure that every victim was identified, and he was tenacious. He was a bulldog, and I want to honor his spirit and his tenacity in all the podcasts, but in this one in particular. So let's get into this one. Here we go. Transcript of testimony. Before the coroner's jury, July 24th, 25th, 26th, 27th, 28th, 29th, on the body of Kate Austin and all others lost by the overturning of the excursion steamer Eastland while tied to the dock at Clark and South Water Streets in the city of Chicago, July 24th, 1915. Peter M. Hoffman, Coroner, Chicago, Cook County, Illinois. That is the title on the cover of this document. This is the next page. Inquest upon the body of Kate Austin et al. Held July 24th, 25th, 26th, 27th, 28th, 29th, 1915 at Chicago, Illinois. This evidence applies to all lives lost on the SS Eastland. Name and address of witnesses and occupations. R. J. Moore, 6217 Ingleside Avenue. Occupation, salesman. Daniel W. G., 1108 Laurel Avenue. Occupation, Western Electric Company. Charles A. Malmros, 6629 34th Street, Berwyn, Illinois. Occupation, Western Electric Company. Walter K. Greenbaum. Occupation, Manager, Indiana Transportation Company. Algernon C. Ritchie, 737 North LaSalle Street. Occupation, Solicitor. Adam F. Weckler, 1143 North Shore Avenue. Occupation, Harbor Master. Joseph R. Lynn, 6915 Princeton Avenue. Occupation, Assistant Harbor Master. John H. O'Mara, 733 North Dearborn Street. Occupation, Master Tugboats. Walter C. Steele. Occupation, Treasurer, St. Joseph, Chicago, SS Company. L. C. Wheeler, Chicago, Illinois. Occupation, Department of Justice. William J. Wood, 504 Postal Telegraph Building. Occupation, Naval Architect. Walter C. Steele, St. Joseph, Michigan. Occupation, Treasurer. Martin Flatow, 5105 Montrose Avenue. Occupation, Excursion Agent. Harry A. Pedersen or Peterson, St. Joseph, Michigan. Occupation, Master Steamships. Joseph M. Erickson, St. Joseph, Michigan. Occupation, Marine Engineer. Victor A. Allender, 35 53 Belden Avenue, occupation Seamen's Union. Fred W. Willard, 306 North Elmwood Avenue, Oak Park, occupation chemical engineer. James Ryan, 3539 Colorado Avenue, occupation bridge tender. Fred G. Snow, 406 North Gaylord Avenue, occupation marine engineer. Peter Erickson, Christiana, Norway, occupation oiler. Adelbert Fisher, St. Joseph, Michigan, occupation first mate. The next heading, roll call of jurors. Name, W.A. Evans. Address, Tribune, Chicago. William C. Moore, Boston Oyster House, Chicago. William F. Bode or Bodie, Reed Murdoch and Company, Chicago. Eugene V. Beifeld, Sherman House, Chicago. John S. Keogh, William F. McLaughlin and Company, Chicago. Henry A. Allen, 913 Galt Avenue. C. F. Kennedy, Deputy Coroner. State of Illinois, County of Cook, SS, before the Coroner of Cook County, inquest on the bodies of Kate Austin et al. Regarding the Eastland disaster. Transcript of testimony taken and proceedings had at an inquest held upon the bodies of the above-named deceased before Coroner Peter M. Hoffman and Deputy Coroner Charles F. Kennedy, and a jury duly impaneled and sworn in Room 811, County Building, Chicago, Illinois, on Tuesday, July 28th, and Wednesday, July 29th, A.D. 1915. Appearances: Maclay Hoyne, State's Attorney; Michael S. Sullivan, Assistant State's Attorney; John F. Higgins, Assistant State's Attorney; A.J. Sabbath, representing the Bohemian American Societies of Chicago; James A. Barber, representing the St. Joseph and Chicago Transportation Company; M. Korshak, representing the Corporation Council of Chicago. Requested by W.K. Alcreer, A.J. Flynn, L.H. Morse, W.C. Yunker. Now I'm going to read the dialogue between the coroner and the various people who are in the courtroom, and then we are going to focus in on the account of one witness named R.J. Moore. Coroner: Gentlemen, I shall ask you to keep as quiet as possible during this hearing and during this investigation, in order that the jurors and all interested may hear the evidence given here. I shall ask the chief of police and the sheriff to keep absolute order. I don't want anybody around the aisles unless they can be seated, and unless they are absolutely interested, they will have to leave the room outside of the police and sheriff. It is hot in this room and close, and absolute order will be necessary so the jurors may hear the testimony. Gentlemen of the jury, you are all present. Let the record show a roll call. I wish to say to the jurors in this case, and all those interested in this case, in behalf of the jurors and coroner, that it is our intention to make a fair, thorough, and impartial investigation because of this great loss of life. We expect to take the important evidence we can, and when we have so done, we expect to place the blame for this loss of life without fear or favor. We wish now to proceed and take evidence in order to expedite matters. I desire to ask if there are any attorneys here representing any relatives of the deceased or the owners of the Eastland. If so, kindly step forward and hand in your card in order that we may record the names. Coroner. Let the record show that the state is represented by Mr. Hoyne and Mr. Sullivan and several assistants. I desire to say that the state's attorney is cooperating with the coroner and that it is his privilege to question, and I hope he will, the witnesses that may be heard here today, because I may not be able to bring out the full facts. Question. Are there any attorneys here representing anyone? Answer. Theodore C. Robinson. Whom you represent? The insurance companies. Are there any others, Mr. Barber? I am here so far as they need representation interested in ascertaining the facts. Coroner. Mr. Deputy, I have designated to you, prior to the opening of this inquiry, the names of the first lot of witnesses we wish to hear, and if you have them all brought in, I will have them sworn. Deputy Coroner Kennedy calls witnesses as follows. Mr. G., Mr. Greenbaum, Walter C. Steele, Bridge Tender, Clark Street, Captain Pedersen, Del Fisher, Peter Fisher, Chief Engineer Erickson, C.F. Sellernail, Mackenzie Harrigan, Al Weber, William Gordon, John M. Amora, A.D. McDonald, Captain Egan, Fire Department. In paren, all witnesses sworn by coroner. Coroner, Mr. Sheriff, or if the police officials in charge will kindly take these witnesses back to the room and hold them there until we call out their respective names. After the witnesses have been examined here, those witnesses will be turned over to the state's attorney, and he will take charge of the witnesses until such time as he feels ready to release them. Therefore, if a witness testifies, it isn't said that he is through. When the state gets through with a witness, with the exception of Mr. Moore, he will kindly step back in the other room with the sheriff and police officials. Coroner. Congressman Sabbath, what is it? Congressman A.J. Sabbath. Yesterday, at a meeting of Bohemian American citizens of the city of Chicago, a nationality which has suffered a great deal in this disaster, I have been requested by the General Committee to represent it in any way possible. I realize, however, that the state and the city and county are well represented, and if there is no objection that myself and other gentlemen with me may be present and lend such aid as is possible in the investigation. Coroner. I desire to say on the representation of the state's attorney, the stenographers and reporters, they must not smoke up this room. You have taken one or two pictures. Now they're calling forth the first witness, and that would be R.J. Moore. R.J. Moore, called as a witness, having been first duly sworn, was examined by Coroner Hoffman and testified as follows. What is your full name, Mr. Moore? R.J. Moore. Your residence and occupation? 6217 Ingleside Avenue, salesman. Employed where? Murphy Varnish Company. Were you a passenger on the ill-fated steamer Eastland on Saturday last? Yes, sir. What time did you arrive at the dock where the boat was moored? About 7 o'clock. And when the boat tipped over, on which deck were you? The second deck, right over the dance hall. It is my desire that you state to the jurors, the state's attorney, and the coroner the conditions you observed on that boat and estimate as accurately as possible the number of passengers boarded the boat from the time you arrived there until it tipped over. When I started down the stairs to go onto the boat, there was a long line, 5 or 6 abreast. And as I was getting along the side of the boat, I saw water coming out of there. I saw it by the ton. Out of where? 6 or 7 holes in the side of the boat. On what side? Toward the dock. On the starboard side? Well, I'm not a sailor. Anyway, I remarked to a gentleman they were taking out a lot of ballast. He said it isn't ballast. It is exhaust steam. I thought it was throwing out a lot of steam. It was about 7:10, and the first indication of the boat listing was about 8 or 9 minutes before it went down, when the refrigerator in the bar was thrown over with all the bottles and made a terrific crash. I was on the second floor and could see the bottles on the floor from that end, and the boat started to list north. And if they were given a signal at that time, I think most of the people could have gotten off the boat. From that time on, the boat kept listing. I tried to get on the south side. There were a little batch of ladies and children, and I took a chance and went with the crowd. I went through the staircase, and just as I struck the floor, the water struck me. I got up in some part of the boat and worked my way through. I suppose about the width of this umbrella, and maybe 14 feet long. It was filled with women and children. They were all saved. I don't know if any of them are here or not. I was pulled out a second to last by one of the firemen. I think he belonged to a tugboat. I hung on down in there for 35 minutes before I was taken out. When I came out, I wandered away. My clothes were all torn, and I was dazed. From the time the boat first began to list to the port side, which is north, up to the time it entirely toppled over was how long? I would say 8 to 10 minutes. The boat was going all the time. It was a peculiar action. The boat loaded. How long after you noticed the bottles on the floor and the tipping of the refrigerator did the boat turn over completely? I think about 8 or 10 minutes. Did you hear any orders given to ask the passengers to get off the boat? There was no officer on deck at all. What was the condition of the crowd, the number of people on the boat? The crowd was very big. It was impossible to get a seat or a chair. I was on the upper deck. You mean the starboard deck, on the roof? On the roof. About how many people were on the roof? Well, it is pretty hard to estimate, as near as you can estimate. I should judge about 800 or 900 people. What else was there up on the roof? I didn't pay much attention. I looked, but there wasn't a seat there, and it started raining, and I went down. Was there any other boat deck fitting up with chairs? There were seats around at different places. I don't know. I didn't pay much attention. When I started to go down, I had to wait probably 4 or 5 minutes. It is a narrow stairway, and the people were going up. I walked down. Give us, approximately, if you can, the number of people on the promenade deck. About how many people were on it? Well, an awful crowd of people. Were they crowded closely together? All crowded closely together. I was standing against the staircase. There was just room for them. Of course, they were naturally swaying against you. Did you observe the conditions of the spar deck, the next one below? That would be the dance hall. I was on the one above the dance hall. There are 4, if you call the top a deck. Oh, yes. Can you say as to whether the boat was crowded in all its various floors? Well, it was awfully crowded on the floor I was on. When the refrigerator tipped over, did that excite the passengers at all? Not very much concerned the crowd. Did they run to either side? Did they run to either one side? No, there was no running at all. The crowd was equally divided up. Question by Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Moore, on the deck you were on, did you notice how many children there were, or how many young people about the age of 15? Yes, I noticed a lot of children in their mother's arms. Question by Coroner. Pending the compiling of the figures in my office, could you give the jurors a rough estimate? Well, I couldn't possibly do that. There were a lot of boys and girls there from the age of 8 up to 15 running around, having a good time, trying to locate themselves. Did you notice how many children there were below the age of 5? Oh, yes. Many babes in arms of their mothers, were there not? Oh, yes. Coroner. Mr. State's Attorney, if there are any questions I failed to ask the witness, I turn the witness over to you. Question by Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Moore, did you talk with any officer or employee of the boat before she finally went over? No, I had no opportunity. Did you talk to any after she went over? No, I was taken out and was dazed and wandered away myself. You said you saw water pouring out of a large, round hole. Yes, sir. Just what part of the boat was this water coming from? Well, probably about the middle of the boat. It was the side of the entrance. You went into the boat at the stern end. Yes, sir. About how far east of that was this water pouring out? I should judge about 40 or 50 feet. From how many places was it pouring? Several places. How large were the holes from which this water was coming? Well, I don't know. It seemed to be a pretty large stream of water. How many of them? I couldn't state exactly. I talked to this gentleman about the amount of water coming out. You don't know how many different streams there were, or if it was just one. More than one. Couldn't tell whether it was 5 or 6 anyhow. And the volume? There was one, almost filled up the entire hole it came out. Question by Coroner. Was it more round or oblong? Round. Question by Mr. Sullivan. Could you tell about its size? Looked like 12 or 14 inches. Have you had any experience in boat construction? No, not at all. Now, the people on the top deck or the hurricane deck, you couldn't get a seat. Were there more seated? Yes, and a great many were coming upstairs carrying chairs. But the top deck was crowded. Yes, but not nearly so crowded as the deck I was on. Could you make that a little more clear? Say what deck that was on. The deck below the top deck. It is called the promenade deck? Yes, sir. On what side? The south side, near the dock. Were you in any particular room? No, it is kind of a promenade there, right near the staircase as they came up. There are 2 staircases. I was in the middle of the boat. Question by Coroner. Did you purchase a ticket for this trip? Yes, sir. From whom? Some man at the dock. Who took up the ticket when you entered the boat? One of the officers. Did you observe whether he made a registry of the ticket? I wouldn't think the way people were coming in it would be possible for any man to register. Do you think it was impossible for the officer to check the people as fast as they were getting on? It looked to me impossible. How many men were doing the checking? 2 men on the outside and 2 on the inside taking tickets. If these men had a register in their hands, Do you suppose they could use a register in the hand in counting people? Possibly they could. Do you know whether they were counting or not? No, sir. Do any attorneys desire to ask this witness any questions? Question by Mr. Sabbath. The side you were on was crowded, was it not? Yes, sir, very much crowded. Coroner. I think, Mr. Sabbath, the witness testified the entire boat was crowded. Mr. Sabbath. Some question was raised that the people went to the north side of the boat when a certain boat went by. If there was a vacant seat, sometimes a lady would have a coat there. Question by Coroner. Do you think the crowd was greater on the north or south side? I walked over there before this crash came and walked down where people were sitting. They were anxious for their friends, waiting for people. Juror. Would it be a good idea to designate one side of the boat as the dock side and the other as the river side? Question. You were at the dock side? Yes, sir. Could you see what was going on the riverside? No, there was no excitement there until the boat started. No running from one side to the other? No, they jumped one seat to the other. You speak of children running around. How do you mean? Running around, playing around. If they were crowded and you had difficulty in getting through, how could the children be running around? They were stepping on your feet and everything else. What signal did you refer to? The refrigerator going over. From that time, it listed gradually. I understand it was so crowded it was impossible to shove from one side to the other. Very little opportunity for them to crowd over. Any further questions? No response. Coroner. Mr. State's Attorney, I turn this witness over to you. That is the end of the testimony of R.J. Moore. Well, thank you so much for being a part of this reading of this coroner's inquest, of this eyewitness account from the Eastland disaster. I did not edit or revise the testimony. I included every detail because preserving these voices exactly as we find them matters. As we've seen time and time again, so much of the Eastland's history has been left out or overlooked. But the good news, the great news is that the information is out there, and it's up to us as researchers, as storytellers, as family members, to make sure that it is not lost again. Okay, take care and have a good week. Hey, that's it for this episode, and thanks for coming along for the ride. Please subscribe or follow so you can keep up with all the episodes. And for more information, please go to my website. That's www.flowerintheriver.com. I hope you'll consider buying my book, available as audiobook, ebook, paperback, and hardcover, because I still owe people money. And that's my running joke. But the one thing I'm serious about is that this podcast and my book are dedicated to the memory of all who experienced the Eastland disaster of 1915. Goodbye for now.